Welcome to this George Best one-off special on what would have been George's 72nd birthday in association with Zany and Griffiths Clothing on SRB Radio with me, the Gabby Cabby, and my friend and George's pal, Alan Hudson. Huddy, how are you, mate? You okay?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. I'm good. It's great to be able to talk about my mate today.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sad day because, sadly, George is no longer with us. But, you know, George, in essence, will always be with us because the legacy that he left will live forever. And if football was a religion, then George Best is a prophet.
Well, absolutely. I was thinking, after I spoke to you earlier on, it's funny he should have been 72 today because I think his greatest goal I ever seen him score was in 1972. It's Old Trafford when Ron Harris tried to chop him in half. And it was in a League Cup tie. I was injured and I watched it in a pub in Chelsea and it was on one of the first big screens. And George picked up a ball and Ron tried to buckle him and he buckled him in half. And I mean, today's players would have ended up in hospital for a year or so. But George kind of kept his balance, went round Benetti and Marvin Hinton ran on the line and closed his legs. As much as say, you're not going to finish it off by nutmegging me. So, but that was, and then I remember George falling to his knees and just praying and looking up to the sky, you know, as much as say, you blessed me with this talent, you know.
But I'm guessing out of all the goals and all the games he played, I'll echo those words and that sentiment there because, you know, Peter Osgood and many other people used to call Chopper Harris the late Chopper Harris because he was always late. And you're right, he did try and buckle George, but George, being the true artist that he was, rode that tackle like the greatest wave and you're on there, them surfers, that it just nothing would have taken away George's balance because George probably had the greatest balance that I've ever seen in a footballer. Would you echo that?
Yeah, without a doubt. And I remember once, I was out once and Ron Harris said something and it was on television. They used to put it on television a lot and Ron turned around and said, every time I watch that, I still think he's going to go down. Yeah. He says, I can't believe how he never went down. But that was the difference between George Best and the rest of us. Mm-hmm. And especially today's players, when you see all the shirt pulling and everything else that goes on, the man was, you know, he would have even been the best today, you know. There's no doubt about that.
When did you first meet George, Al? What was the situations? What was the dynamics around that first meeting of yours?
Well, I was lucky. One of the greatest things ever happened in my career, at the beginning of my career, was I played against George twice in the 69-70 season. Once the first time at the Bridge and then at Old Trafford. And he was very below par, believe it or not. And I can remember thinking on the way back from Manchester, if George can play like that, then I've got a chance, you know. You know, you don't have to be the best of your, you know, on top of your game every single game. And that gave me a little bit of confidence. It's crazy, really, because if he'd have been at his very, very best, he might have frightened the life out of me. But that did give me a bit of confidence. And I think we were always lucky, Chelsea, because we played there on a Wednesday night. We always looked at our fixture list, and we always seemed to play them in the league on a Wednesday night, and that meant that we could go down his nightclub afterwards and sit with him and listen to all his stories about Miss World and what Miss World he was with at that time. And it was quite. If it had been, I mean, they made a film about him, but the film was rubbish. Really, it was nothing near what George was.
And there's been several books as well written about George, but you know, you knew George, you were a friend of George. What was George really like? And for people reading those books, is it worth picking them up and reading them, or is it just like lots of biographies, opinions from people that didn't necessarily know the great man?
No, I think his books were all about much like what he would do as a stand-up comedian. He would tell stories, whether they were true or not. Well, he didn't have to make them up about Miss World because that was true. But I remember going to see him in the hospital the first day he was in hospital, and I heard the night before about his complaint, and I went up. They wouldn't let me in, and he said he's having no visitors. And then as I said, can I just leave a message for him? And then all of a sudden his agent, Phil Hughes, came out and he went, oh, George will see you. I said, well, I only want a minute of his time. I knew what he must have been going through because I've been through my hell at that time. And I said to him, George, I said, you can have a lot of time on your hands. Why don't you sit down and write the real book? Let everybody know what the real George Best is like, because you know everybody portrays you as something that you're not. You know, he was a lovely man. He was very shy, very modest, which is my favourite thing in anybody. A bit like Bobby Moore. Modesty is everything. And George was like that, and he would go out and I never heard him talk about football. I never heard him talk about anything special that he did. And that made him even more special because he just took it as it come and lived his life like the man next door, you know. I didn't see him very often. When he moved down to Chelsea, I didn't see him a lot. We'd bump into each other, but when we did, we just smiled at each other and had a glass of wine together and had a hug. And he was a very, very special bloke.
Because towards the end of his Man United career, he was going to join Chelsea, but Dave Sexton didn't fancy him. Ironically, I'm guessing if Tony Waddington, the manager that the Ewents play for at Stoke, had been the Chelsea manager, George would have come and joined you guys because he loved your lifestyle, he loved the way that you played football, and Chelsea would have been the ideal fit for George Best.
Well, absolutely. I think, going back to what I said about how Fix is up there on a Wednesday night, I think that was when he fell in love with Chelsea because...
Chris, I've lost. Lost Al, lost the line. Hold on, it's just dropped off. Can we put it back together again?
You got a phone again?
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, give him a call. I'll just keep the line, okay?
Yeah.
It has not been possible to connect your call.
Yep, I will, there we go. Slight little technical hitches. Oh! Yeah, you have the line in.
I don't know if every other team did it, but we definitely, as soon as the final whistle blew, we kind of looked at us walking off the field as much as say, see you at Slack Alice, you know, which was his club at the time. And we would go down there and he would tell us the stories. The one about the Marjorie Wallace when he stole her coat, you know, which was quite a funny story. He didn't steal it for stealing's sake, because she had somebody with her, a chaperone, and she said, "Where's my coat?" So he says, "You'll have to come back for it on your own without a chaperone." So that was his way round of that one. But he had some very, very amusing stories, and we loved listening to him. And that was when he really, as I said, Manchester United team was breaking up. Bobby Charlton was getting too old. Dennis Law was past his best. Paddy Crane was past his best. So they were finished at that time, and that's when they lost in the semi-final, and we played Leeds in the final in '70. They lost to Billy Bremner goal, and that was George's last chance of playing in an FA Cup final, and he really did want to come and play for us.
Although he never played in the FA Cup final, he certainly played in the European Cup final, and that, I guess, with the eyes of the world watching that great game against Benfica at Wembley, that put George on probably the biggest stage that he performed on, because being Northern Ireland born and bred, he never played in a World Cup final, and that was something also that wrangled with George a bit, didn't it?
I put a lot of his drinking habits down to that. He never told me, but it was quite obvious. I mean, I know how devastated I was from missing the 1970 World Cup, but he knew that every 4 years he weren't going to get the opportunity to show everybody in the world that he was the best, you know, and where the World Cup was so much lesser for it. You know, they talk about he's the best player in the world, this fellow was the best player in the world, but George was the best player in the world, and yet he couldn't play. You know, they also had the best goalkeeper in the world, but it was just the other 9 were so inferior. And one of them was my ex-boss, Terry Mills, so it just goes to show you can only be so good and so bad, you know?
And he was a very giving person, wasn't he, George? And, you know, obviously when you were banned from England, he must have looked at his old mate down the road, the George Best of the South, Alan Hudson, and he sent you a card, didn't he, just for you to, you know, to almost to say, look, pal, I'm with you. You're still the best player in my opinion. You put it up where, you know, where it's and where it hurts, basically, didn't he?
Yeah, he didn't. Yeah, but I wouldn't think George was one much for writing letters or whatever. It was just a couple of lines written on a typewriter with his signature on it, and it was at a time when I had been banned for England for 3 years, and I think he walked out on Manchester United. I remember the front page in London. It was him on one side of the page and me on the other, banned for 3 years, and George had walked out and gone to Spain for a holiday, you know, while the season was still going on. So, that's what I think that's with the long hair and everything else and the style of clothing in Chelsea. I think that's why they started calling me like the George Best of the South. I think some people in life just crack it off, and that's what we did, you know. And I had the exact same affair with Bobby Moore. You know, he took me under his wing. And to have them as 2 friends, you know, you just, people don't realise how fortunate you are to have 2 friends like that and such lovely people and 2 of the greatest players in the world.
And I'm guessing, you know, it's written in the stars and you've got star signs. George is the 22nd of May. You're the 21st of June. Are you both of the same Gemini? Is it a Gemini sign that you are?
I'm a Gemini. I don't know if George is under that sign. I'm not sure at all. I know we didn't drink the same drink. That's the only thing I know for sure. But I'm not sure what sign he was. But as you say, I've got a. Funnily enough, I was going through my wardrobe yesterday. I got a signed shirt from him. He gave me from the 1968. It wasn't the one he wore, but they used to get a replica in them days, and he gave it to me as a present, signed to me. So, out of all the people in the world he could have given to me, he give it to me. So I find find that very special.
And also a special night was when he come up to Stoke to open your nightclub as well, didn't he, Al?
He did, yeah. He come a long way to open the club. I had a partner at the time, and he said, who do you think we had? We could have got anyone, really, and obviously paid them, but there was no better person to do it. And, he banged the nightclub out, and, the girls were falling all over his feet and everything else. It was quite an experience. But that was George. Wherever he went, people flocked around him. It was, but as I say, it's not like he took it in as if he was a superstar or nothing like that. He was just so modest, and an everyday guy. He's just a lovely bloke.
I think what happens when you come from working class estates, I mean, George from Belfast and you from London, you have a similar kind of upbringing, and you recognise each other for what they are, and almost kindred spirits, I guess. What floated your boat and got your juices flowing was very, very similar to George. And, if George was half as giving as what you are, Al, I mean, what a terrific guy. And I wish I'd have been able to have met the great man.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I say, George, when he came down to the King's Road, I would see him we used to use the same local, not this Feeney Arms pub, but one in Sloane Square. And I remember one day I walked in, he was sitting on one side of the bar, I was sitting on the other. There weren't many people in. And he just used to sit in the corner and do the crossword. Because he was a very intelligent fella. And he would do the crossword, and we would just send drinks over to each other, and we wouldn't pester each other. And then all of a sudden he'd finish his crossword, and then we'd share a drink together and part ways. I don't think in all the time I knew him we had each other's phone number.
Yeah.
And that I find uncanny, strange. I never asked for his, he never asked for mine. We just kind of said, I'll pass across, and they did quite often.
And you both played in America. Did you play against George while you was in America, or was George there a little bit earlier than you?
No, I played against George. My first season, he was in San Jose.
Yeah.
And then I played against him in the indoor. So I played 2 or 3 times against him over there. That was when he was on the wagon, and it was quite funny. At one game, he was on the wagon. He had a Coca-Cola on top of the bar after the game, and he had a beer underneath it because he wasn't to be seen with a beer in his hand. But that was George, whereas I wouldn't have bothered. I'd have just put it on top of the bar. George is that way inclined. But again, I also played against him in Los Angeles as well. But it was great just to be on the same field as him was something a bit special. You knew you was to walk out. You got a lift, and as I wrote in that piece this morning, had he signed for us, I'd have changed next to him every other Saturday at Stamford Bridge. What a thrill,
How do you think George would have viewed the modern game, Al? I mean, Chelsea, Manchester United, the final, quite a boring affair. United in George's day, Chelsea in your day, you were two of the great show teams of not just English football, but the world. You played with a style, with a swagger that you just don't see today.
Well, it's one of those mystery of life things, isn't it? What it would have been like on Saturday. I mean, we see a couple of picks of genius from the kid Hazard, who can be, pretty special at times. But George was one of those. It didn't matter, how many people tried to get him. He would find a way to get by them. And today there just isn't that talent about today. George would have, I remember when I went to Stoke and people tell me about when Matthews went back there when he was getting on a bit, and he played in a time when they said, well, he wouldn't get a game today, but George would have been without a doubt. I mean, you imagine if Ronaldo and Messi get all these goals in Spain, how many George would score over there? Because their football is, apart from the top 2 teams who are a bit special, there's not much more. But he played in the toughest league in the world, where everybody everybody that went out on a Saturday wanted to want a bit of George, and they would have boasted about it in the pub that night if they could have got him, you know. But they just couldn't.
And today, again, would have been his 72nd birthday. There's a play, Hello George, Goodbye Best, at the Strand Art Centre in Belfast, which is the oldest cinema there, that was established in 1935, and it's the weekend in 1971 where he spent the 2 or 3 days in Sinead Cusack's flat with Raphael Elliston and your mate Robbie Martin as well. So again, a fitting time and an iconic time in George's life as well, wasn't it, that weekend?
Well, it was. It was just it was an ordinary weekend for him, really. Yeah. You know, whereas my friend used to go out with Miss World, Don Shanks, before George. You know, and it's something that people do talk about, but George never ever mentioned. We would quiz him when we went into his nightclub. He wouldn't tell us. He wouldn't, you know, and he would be very shy about it, and you could tell that, you know, even on a Wednesday night, he just played a game, and you know the girls would just flock into his club to see him. You know, he was. Had he been in Hollywood, they wouldn't be talking about George Clooney.
Yeah.
You know, and not only that, you know, he had the name. Everybody in Hollywood have to change their name, but he didn't. He was born with the name, and he lived up to it.
The Belfast boy that had it all.
Absolutely.
An artist of a player whose canvas was the grass.
Yeah, I mean, you can write and talk about George, but I don't think anyone. I mean, I think probably my old boss got it right. The Working Man's Ballet. When George was in full flow and you put music to him, that was the Working Man's Ballet.
Well, when I get home tonight, the first thing I'm going to do is raise a glass to the great man. We're going to leave it there because we're going to reconvene shortly. So,
all right, mate.
For now, cheers, Al. Thanks for your time.
You're very welcome, Paul. It's a pleasure.
Lovely. And God bless you, George. We all miss you.
Yes, I'm with you.
Cheers,
pal.
Bye-bye now.